Poor girl cleaned an office floor, not knowing the millionaire owner was secretly watching, and the doorknob turned slowly, followed by a soft creak. Carol pushed with her shoulder, balancing a cleaning bucket in one hand and a mop in the other. As soon as she stepped into the spacious office, the sound of her footsteps on the polished floor was swallowed by the absolute silence of the night. The wall clock read 11:12 p.m. She had already cleaned 3 floors of that luxurious office building in Manhattan's upscale district, and now only one remained, the 45th floor, home to Luxuria Inc., one of the most prestigious interior design firms in the United States. Carol set the bucket down by the wall, adjusted her hair, which was tied in a simple bun, and walked toward the back of the room, where she would begin cleaning. Her eyes, however, wandered, as they always did, to the piece of furniture in the center of the large hall. A hand-carved wooden chair with a high back, smooth curves, and a cream leather upholstered seat. It was a unique piece, French design from the 1950s, finished in walnut. She stopped. She always did. Resting the mop handle on the floor, she approached the chair like one might approach a work of art. Her gloved right hand, worn at the fingertips, slid gently along the armrest. She never dared sit, never even touched the seat, but the way she looked at the chair revealed more than simple admiration. Upstairs, a shadow moved silently between the frosted glass partitions. Mike was coming down late that night. He needed a project he'd left in the meeting room. He had just stepped out of the private elevator when, walking through the hallway, he spotted the young woman standing beside the chair. He didn't know her. He rarely came to the office at that hour, and almost never paid attention to the cleaning staff who only came at night. But something about her posture made him pause. Mike instinctively stepped back and stood still behind a divider, where he could see her without being seen. She wasn't just taking a break from work. She was looking at that chair like someone looking at a story. There was something serene and yet intense in her expression. No hurry, no weariness in her face, only a glow, as if she saw more than just shapes and lines. Mike furrowed his brow slightly, intrigued. Carol then pulled a small, worn hardcover notebook from the pocket of her shirt. Carefully, she rested it on the back of the chair and opened it to a page marked with a fabric ribbon. She took out a pen and began sketching with precise, gentle strokes. It was as if she were redrawing the piece, or reinventing its essence. She seemed completely oblivious to the world around her, and that captivated Mike in a way he couldn't explain. For several minutes, he simply watched her, unmoving. Then, remembering why he had come down, he quietly went to the meeting room, grabbed the documents he needed, and returned to the elevator, staying far from her. Carol never noticed he was there. The next night, Mike came down later than usual and once again waited upstairs. When she arrived, everything repeated itself. Bucket, mop, pause in front of the chair. But this time she seemed even more absorbed. And so it went, night after night. In just over a week, watching Carol became a discreet, almost clandestine ritual. Mike didn't know why he kept hiding. Maybe he didn't want to startle her. Maybe, deep down, he feared that if he introduced himself, the quiet magic of that moment would vanish. One night, as she leaned against the wall, sat on the cold floor and opened her notebook with a tired sigh, he noticed something slip from its pages. A small, yellowed envelope. Carol didn't see it fall. She kept drawing for a few more minutes, then stood up and resumed cleaning. Minutes later, after hearing the elevator close, Mike came down. He walked to the chair and picked up the fallen envelope. Inside, there was an old business card and a folded letter. The handwriting was simple and a bit shaky. "Carol, I know you haven't given up yet. Even if the world says no, keep drawing. You have a gift. And one day, someone will see what I see in you. Grandma Maria." Mike closed the letter gently, as if holding something precious. The next night, he decided he would speak to her. He thought about how to introduce himself. He wouldn't say he was the owner of the company. That would change everything. She would see him as a millionaire, someone distant, unreal. And Mike wanted to see how far the quiet enchantment could go if he were just an ordinary man. That night, he came down early, carrying a plain briefcase and no suit. He wore dark jeans and a cotton shirt, his face slightly tired but calm. When Carol walked in, he was already in the corner of the room, pretending to examine a floor plan. She stopped, surprised to see him there. "Good evening," she said politely. Mike looked up and smiled. "Good evening. Are you the one responsible for keeping this place sparkling?" She gave a modest smile. "I try my best." "Michael," he said, offering his hand. "External projects architect." Carol shook his hand, a little hesitant. "Carol. Beautiful name." She nodded in thanks and began moving toward the back of the room, but he followed her with his eyes. "You draw?" he asked. Carol stopped, surprised. "How do you know?" "I saw your notebook the other day. It fell from your pocket. I didn't look through it, but I caught a glimpse of some sketches." She blushed slightly, embarrassed. "It's just a hobby, nothing serious." "Doesn't look like nothing. There's talent there. I mean it." Carol looked at him with suspicion, then curiosity. It wasn't often someone noticed her like that. "Thank you. Have you ever thought about studying design?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "I have, but thinking is free. College, not so much." Mike didn't answer right away. He just watched her return to her cleaning, now more introspective. There was something about her that stirred something unexpected in him, something beyond youth, beauty, or kindness. It was authenticity, and for the first time in a long time, Mike felt he wanted to truly get to know someone. No masks, no contracts, no luxury, just Carol. The notebook slipped from the apron pocket and fell to the floor with a muffled thud. Carol didn't even notice. She was focused on dragging the cleaning bucket to the break room on that floor, where she usually started her routine. The soft impact of the falling object went unnoticed, but someone who had been watching saw it happen. Mike was there again. The night was cold, and he had decided to stay a little longer at the office, telling himself he needed to review some contracts. But deep down, he knew he was waiting for this moment, to see Carol arrive, quiet as always, and begin her work with that same calm resignation that fascinated him so much. She had a different way of being in a place, as if she were trying not to belong there, and yet somehow made it better just by being present. When she disappeared behind the partition, Mike walked down the steps with careful strides. He bent down and picked up the notebook. The cover was a bit faded, the corners worn, and dust clung to the side stitching. The paper was thick, yellowed around the edges. He hesitated for a moment, then opened it carefully. The first pages were filled with sketches of furniture, chairs, tables, bookshelves, each drawn with meticulous detail and notes scribbled beside them. Backrest too tilted? Base supported at 3 points? Matte finish leather, maybe? These weren't just pretty drawings. There was technique. There was study. There was soul. Further in, there were inspiration vignettes, jotted references, clippings taped in place, tiny handwritten notes like secrets. And then, folded between 2 pages, a letter written in shaky but determined cursive. He read slowly, almost reverently. "Carol, I know you haven't given up yet. Even if the world says no, keep drawing. You have a gift. And one day, someone will see what I see in you. Grandma Maria." Mike closed the notebook and stared at the cover for a while. It was like holding a piece of someone. This wasn't just a sketch pad. It was the diary of a dream kept in silence. A silence that matched her, matched the way she moved through the building each night, with eyes full of something almost no one noticed. He kept the notebook with him. He didn't want to leave it there where it might get lost or ruined. He decided he would return it in person, and when he did, he would speak to her again. This time, with more intention. The following night he arrived early. He wore simple clothes, a grey sweater, dark jeans, his hair swept back in a deliberately casual way. He carried the notebook under his arm. When Carol walked in, he was standing by a side table, pretending to examine a desk lamp. She noticed him with surprise but didn't seem uncomfortable. She simply nodded in greeting. "You left this yesterday," he said, holding out the notebook. Carol's eyes widened and she rushed over. "Oh my God, where did you find it?" "It was on the floor near that chair," he replied simply. "I figured it was important." It's practically everything I have of myself," she said, hugging the notebook to her chest. Thank you, really. Mike smiled. I'm glad I found it before someone threw it out. Don't even say that. I've lost things like this before to overzealous cleanings. She trailed off, embarrassed. It was as if she had said too much. I only read a little, Mike admitted. I hope you don't mind. She frowned slightly but didn't seem angry, just exposed. Well, there's not much mystery in there, just sketches, dreams. Dreams are important, more than luxury furniture. She laughed, surprised by the comment. Are you really an architect? Mike nodded slowly. I worked for many years. These days I focus more on strategy, but I still draw when I can. That explains why you know so much about wood. And you? Did you learn on your own? My grandma taught me. She was an amateur woodworker, made small furniture for neighbors. She taught me how to sand, measure, cut. When she got older, I stopped working with it, but I never stopped drawing. Your lines are very good. There's precision, but also emotion. Carol looked surprised, almost moved by the compliment. No one's ever said that. Well, then I hope it's the first of many times, Mike said, then paused. Have you ever thought about showing your drawings to someone in the field? I don't have any connections, and honestly, I wouldn't even know where to start. That world feels very far from mine. Mike listened to the way she spoke. There was no bitterness, no self-pity, just a statement of fact, a mature awareness of the reality around her. Sometimes the distance between two worlds is smaller than we think. Carol smiled, but there was weariness in that smile. Only if someone builds a bridge, and those things don't happen to people like me. Mike held on to that sentence. The way she said people like me hit him harder than he expected. He thought of how often he had heard the opposite, people saying people like us as if they were superior. And now, here was someone who deserved so much, yet spoke as if she were destined to remain in the background of the world. She went back to work, wiping one of the tables with gentle strokes. Mike stayed a while longer, watching in silence, then said his goodbyes. Can I come by another time? Sure, she said without looking up. Just don't expect much conversation. I'm more of a listener than a talker. Perfect. So am I. He left. When the elevator doors closed, Carol paused for a moment and looked down at the notebook in her hands. His words still echoed in her mind. Dreams are more important than luxury furniture. That night, for the first time in a long while, she didn't draw to escape reality, but to get closer to something or someone that made her dream feel just a little more possible. You got here early today, Mike said, suddenly appearing at the end of the hallway, lit by the cool ceiling lights. Carol, who was pushing the cleaning cart toward the meeting room, turned around slightly startled. She was used to the absolute silence of that shift. She hadn't expected to hear voices, especially his. Hi, she replied, composing herself with a faint smile. Yeah, I managed to finish the other building ahead of schedule. Then I'm lucky, he commented, walking over to one of the glass windows that overlooked the city at night. She stopped the cart, hesitated for a moment and placed her hands on her hips. Do you always work this late? Only when I need to think, he replied, without taking his eyes off the city below. And it's quiet here. Reminds me that some things are still real. Carol didn't answer. She grabbed a cloth and began wiping down one of the tables with long, steady strokes, as if each line of the tabletop carried a task that needed to be completed with respect. Mike watched her. That was the third night in a row they'd exchanged a few words. There was something growing in those encounters, something he couldn't quite name. Carol, can I ask you something? He said, slowly approaching. She nodded, not stopping her work. What would you rather be doing right now if you weren't here? The sponge stopped. She looked up, thoughtful but with a hint of discomfort. I'm not sure it's worth thinking about those things, she murmured. We dream too much and then trip on the hard ground of reality. Still, I'd like to know. She set the cloth down, crossed her arms. I'd want to be creating. Maybe in a small studio, full of raw wood, sawdust and bitter coffee. I'd want to design furniture, put my ideas into action, not just clean up after other people's ideas. Mike listened in silence, struck by the clarity of that image. And why don't you do that? Because life taught me that everything is expensive, she answered, almost smiling, but with a tinge of bitterness. College, time, tools, it's all an equation that rarely balances. I take care of my grandmother. I work nights. All I've got left are doodles in lost hours. He nodded slowly, taking in every word. And even so, you keep going. Because giving up hurts more than trying, she said, then laughed awkwardly. Sorry, I talked too much. No, you didn't. You said just enough for me to understand that you've got more passion for what you do than a lot of people I know at the top of the creative ladder. She lowered her gaze, moved by his words. Mike stepped closer to the table and leaned on it, arms crossed. When you talk about design, your eyes change. It's like they light up from the inside out. Carol looked away, embarrassed. You're exaggerating. I'm not. And please, just call me Michael. She nodded. Okay. Michael. He smiled when he heard his name spoken by her. There was something gentle, almost intimate in the simplicity of it. Have you ever thought about showing your sketches to someone? I'm not brave enough, she admitted. I don't have a degree. No one's going to take seriously what comes out of a janitor's old notebook. I did, he said firmly, and I saw value. That sentence lingered in the air for a few seconds. Carol seemed to absorb the impact. She took a deep breath and stepped back slightly, as if trying to create some emotional distance. You seem like a good person, Michael, but I've heard too many compliments in life that didn't take me anywhere. Mike moved toward her slowly, not invading her space but with a direct gaze. What if I said I don't want to compliment you? Just listen more. Carol smiled, a shy but genuine expression. Then maybe I'll agree to say a bit more. They stayed quiet for a few minutes, simply sharing the same space. Mike leaning on the table, Carol cleaning with almost choreographed movements. Little by little, the sounds of the night outside became background noise, as if time had paused just for that conversation. And what about you? She asked suddenly. Why are you always here so late? Mike hesitated for a moment, then answered with carefully measured honesty. Because during the day everything's too loud. Spreadsheets, decisions, people pretending to be important. At night, I can just be someone who loves what they do. Do you still draw? Once in a while. It's been a long time since I picked up a pencil just for fun. Maybe I'm trying to remember what that was like. And have you remembered? He looked at her, serious. I'm starting to. She gripped the cloth a little tighter, feeling something shift inside her. A kind of recognition, as if the two had crossed paths long ago, not in a physical place, but an emotional one. Mike walked over to a shelf and pulled out a book on Scandinavian design. He handed it to her. If you want, you can take this home. It's a good read, might inspire you. Really? Think of it as a loan, no due date. She held the book carefully, as if it were something valuable. Thank you, Michael. You're welcome. I want to see where your lines take you. Carol sat down for a moment in the chair in the corner, the French wooden one. She had never sat there before, but in that moment, it felt right. Mike watched her. To him, the scene felt complete. The right woman in the right piece at the right time. An invisible frame began to form around the image. You belong here more than you realize, Carol. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, there was a new light in them. Not quite hope, something subtler, deeper, a beginning. That night, Mike left the office later than usual. But for the first time in years, he walked out feeling light. As if he were starting to remember who he was, and everything he had forgotten that made him human. Have you ever been to a design gallery? Mike asked, adjusting his coat over his shoulders as he walked alongside Carol on the cold sidewalk in the final days of winter. She looked at him with a surprised, though not suspicious, expression. She still wasn't used to conversations outside the office, but had gradually learned to trust that man with his gentle manners and calm voice. A gallery? No, it's never. I've seen pictures, magazines, but never in person, she replied, shifting the strap of her canvas bag on her shoulder. Why? There's a new exhibit in a private showroom owned by the company. Nothing too big, but there are some interesting pieces. Would you like to come with me? Carol hesitated. The cold stung her face like tiny needles, but the invitation warmed something inside her she hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. I don't know. She began, pulling her coat tighter around her body. That kind of place, it's not for me. Mike stopped walking and looked at her gently. Anyone who loves design belongs in any space where there's art, and I want to hear your opinion. She searched his eyes. There was no judgment, no pity, just a sincere invitation. She took a deep breath. Okay, but only if it's quick. I have to be home by 10. My grandma's waiting with chamomile tea. Mike smiled in that way he only smiled with her. Fair enough. I promise I won't steal more than an hour. They walked side by side for a few more blocks until they reached a glass-fronted building with a discreet sign, Luxuria Design Studio. A security guard greeted them with a slight nod, not surprised. Mike seemed like a regular there. Do you come here often? Carol asked casually, but with curiosity. Now and then, he replied, holding the glass door open. I have some good memories in this place. The entrance was quiet, perfumed with a soft, woody scent. The polished concrete floor gleamed under diffused lighting, and every piece of furniture looked positioned to be admired like sculpture. Carol slowed her pace as she stepped inside. It felt like entering a temple. The furniture wasn't just functional, it was conceptual, stories told through curves and textures. A carved wooden bench evoked the image of an embrace. A chair made of wrought iron and dark leather resembled a nest. A hand-painted folding screen told an Eastern story about time. She approached a modular bookshelf made of blocks of different sizes and finishes. This is genius, she murmured, kneeling to examine the joints between the pieces. It feels like a living structure. Mike watched her from a distance, captivated by how she moved through the space. It wasn't just aesthetics that drew her. It was the emotion each piece stirred. The woman who designed that shelf was Swedish back in the 80s, he said as he came closer. She used to say that each module represented a life choice, and life is made of unpredictable fits. Carol chuckled softly. Then my life is this whole shelf, just a bunch of blocks stacked however they can. Mike couldn't help but smile. And still, it's beautiful. She looked away, blushing. Do you always talk to people like this? Like what? Like you're seeing inside them, more than what they show. Only when someone deserves to be seen. Carol bit her lower lip, fighting back a smile. They continued the visit for another half hour. At every piece she asked questions, touched, commented. Mike was surprised by her insights. No empty technical jargon, no compliments just to be polite. She spoke with the eyes of someone who understood what few did, the heart of things. They stopped in front of a low chair, entirely handmade from curved wood. The seat was woven straw, and the tilted backrest invited relaxation. This chair, Carol said in a hushed voice, as if speaking to it, it feels like it's saying, stay a while, breathe. Mike was silent for a few seconds before responding, that's exactly what the designer said when he introduced it years ago, word for word. She turned to him, surprised. Really? Really? Carol stepped back slightly, as if unsure where to place all the emotion she was feeling. She was amazed, but there was also a touch of sadness. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever make it, you know. Get close to something like this. Carol, no, it's okay, I know where I stand. I clean floors. You guys design beautiful things. That's how the world works. Mike took a step closer. But maybe it shouldn't work that way, and maybe you're closer than you think. She looked at him skeptically. You say that because you're kind, but the industry isn't kind. I say it because it's true and because I see something in you that few people have. What? Love for detail and respect for things. She lowered her eyes. That compliment didn't feel like flattery. It felt like recognition. They left the gallery minutes later, walking under the dark sky, speckled with city lights. Thanks for this, Carol said. It was special. I should thank you. You reminded me of what brought me here in the first place. She looked at him sideways as if trying to figure him out. You never told me exactly what you do, Michael. Do you work for Luxuria? He hesitated, then answered calmly. Let's say I have some influence at the company. Influence how? Are you a designer executive? Mike looked away toward the street. A bit of both, maybe. But I'm not big on labels. I prefer to say I work with creation. Carol nodded, not pressing. She wasn't one to force intimacy. Fair enough, I'm not big on labels either. I prefer to be called a learner. You're more than that. Not yet, but maybe someday. She smiled, and for the first time he saw that smile with no reservations. It was light, sincere, full of future. So, Mike said, stopping at the corner where she usually caught the subway, can I call you another day? There's another exhibit opening next week. If it's about furniture, sure, she replied. But you owe me a hot coffee next time. I nearly froze today. Deal. She waved as she descended the subway stairs. Mike stood there for a few moments, staring at the space she'd just occupied. Then, with a quiet sigh, he turned and walked back, with the distinct feeling that for the first time in years, he was living something that truly mattered. I was born in Newark, but I really grew up at my grandmother's house in Elizabeth, said Carol, slowly turning the coffee cup between her hands. My mom died when I was 8. My dad disappeared before that, so she raised me. Mike listened intently, sitting across from her in a small cafe, its windows fogged up from the cold afternoon. They had met there after visiting a little thrift store where Carol liked to browse old furniture and forgotten books. No art exhibitions this time, just a quiet break, a warm coffee, and a conversation that had been deepening since their first good morning at the office. She must be a strong woman, he said gently. She is, or at least she was. These days she's more tired. The years haven't been kind, but her spirit's still there. Stubborn as a rock. Mike smiled at the comment. Was she the one who taught you how to draw? She didn't draw, actually, but she was great with wood. She made shelves, cabinets, even simple toys. I'd hang around with a notebook and a pencil. She used to say, "You notice too much for your age." And I really did. The way the wood reacted to the cut, the smell of hot glue, the creaks when the screws settled in, it was like a different kind of music. Mike tilted his head slightly. That's how you talk about things, like someone who hears what no one else notices. Carol laughed shyly. I talk too much, sorry. No, you talk beautifully. It's rare to hear someone speak about what they love with that much honesty. She rested her elbows on the table and propped her chin in her hands. What about you? How do you end up in this world? The question caught him off guard. He leaned back in his chair, watching the steam rise from his cup. I was a shy kid, kept to myself, grew up in Boston. My mum used to sew for a bridal boutique. Sometimes I'd wait for her at the end of the day and watch her finish a piece. One day she gave me a scrap of fabric and said, "Turn this into something beautiful." And did you? I tried, made a crooked tie. She said it was the most elegant thing she'd ever seen. Carol smiled, her eyes almost shining. Mothers know how to lie with love. They do, but sometimes that's exactly what we need to get started. For a moment, they sat in silence, looking out the window. Outside, life rushed by as always. Inside the cafe, there was a pause, a safe space where two very different worlds quietly touched. Mike spoke again, his voice a little lower. I got a degree in design, went to Europe, worked in a bunch of studios. One day I decided to start my own company. It began with a furniture line, then came the contracts, the investors, the franchises, and somewhere in all that, I lost the thread of what used to move me. Carol looked at him serious. And what moved you? He looked at her straight on. The eyes of people like you. She looked away, her heart suddenly racing. She didn't know what to do with those words, or how to answer them. She just took another sip of coffee, like someone hiding behind the cup. I keep thinking, she said finally, that maybe what we call success is just a detour from our original path. Could be. Or maybe real success is finding your way back to the start after getting lost. You think there's still time to go back? Mike didn't answer right away. He just looked at her with tenderness. I think sometimes we need to find someone who reminds us why we started. She lowered her eyes, feeling a wave of emotion rise in her chest. She took a deep breath, like someone trying to resist the urge to let go. And you, have you remembered? I'm remembering now. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was dense, full of unspoken things that were still understood, as if their souls were speaking a language their bodies hadn't yet learned. "Tell me one of your dreams," Mike asked gently. "A dream? One you've never told anyone?" She hesitated, fiddled with the napkin on the table, as if searching for courage in the folds of paper. "One day I want to launch my own brand. Simple, beautiful, affordable furniture. None of those $1,000,000 pieces made for rooms nobody uses. I want to make things that tell stories but fit into real people's lives. That's more than a dream, that's a mission. My grandma says dreaming big takes the same effort as dreaming small. So, why not?" Mike chuckled softly, impressed. "Do you already have a name for your brand?" "I do," she said, eyes sparkling. "It would be called Maria and Wood, in her honor." He held back a smile, moved. That name has soul and roots. They finished their coffee with lighter conversation. Old movies, favorite foods, places they'd like to visit. But something had changed that afternoon. Something had settled between them like an invisible bridge. When they left, Mike walked her to the subway entrance. The sidewalk, still wet from melting snow, reflected the streetlights. "Thanks for the coffee," she said, turning to him. "It was unexpectedly necessary. And you, Carol, were unexpectedly transformative." She laughed, looking away. "You've got a way with words, you know that. And you've got a way with the world." She shook her head, unsure how to respond. "I've got Thursday off," she said casually, though the tone revealed more than she intended. "I usually spend the afternoon at the public library design section. Mind if I stop by?" "You can, but only if you're not wearing a suit. I promise I'll go in disguise." She smiled, waved, and headed down the steps. Mike stood there, watching until she disappeared from view. He felt like someone who had just found a missing piece of himself. He didn't know where any of this would lead, but he knew he wanted to find out. With her. And slowly. "No, Carol, you're not getting it," exclaimed Grandma Maria, her eyes shining and the letter trembling in her hands. "This is real. You've been selected for a scholarship." Carol stood in the middle of the cramped kitchen in their small apartment, still in her school uniform, her hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes wide as she stared at the envelope her grandmother was waving like a flag. The yellowish light from the lamp cast soft shadows on the walls and on the little rack of dish towels above the sink. "Calm down, Grandma. Let me take a proper look," she said, carefully taking the letter from her grandmother's hands. The letterhead bore the official seal of Luxuria Inc., but the content seemed unbelievable. She had been nominated for an internal company program designed to identify invisible talent that offered a full scholarship for an intensive interior design course at a prestigious technical school, along with a supervised internship. "This has to be a mistake," she murmured, reading it again. "I never signed up for anything." "But it has your name on it, the right address," insisted Grandma Maria, pulling out a chair to sit down. "And you're always hanging around with that guy, Michael. You think maybe he—" Carol froze. "No, he didn't say anything. Never mentioned this. It couldn't have been him." But even as she spoke, something inside her tightened. A subtle unease mixed with a shy warmth. Michael, always showing up at the right moments, always saying the right things, always with a kindness that made everything feel possible. But also, always vague about who he really was. The next night, while cleaning the office, she found him sitting on the couch in the conference room. He didn't have his usual stack of papers. He was just sitting there with a look that was far too calm. "You knew about this?" she asked straight out, walking in without hesitation and holding up the letter. Mike glanced at the paper, read the first line, then looked up at her. His face didn't show surprise, just a faint smile appeared. "I did." "Was it you?" "I only recommended your name. The rest was up to the company's talent committee." "Committee? What committee?" "I clean floors, Michael. No one here even knows my name except you." He stood slowly. "And that's exactly the problem this program is trying to solve. Invisible people with extraordinary talent. People like you." She crossed her arms, skeptical. You're not telling me everything, are you? Mike took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Not yet. But I will. When the time is right. And who decides when that is? She shot back, her voice low but steady. Mike held her gaze. There was no arrogance, no rush, just respect, and a hint of fear. You do? She looked away, heart pounding. Part of her wanted to walk out, to escape that heavy moment. But another part, the part that trusted him, whispered to stay, and she stayed. If this is some pity gift disguised as an opportunity, I don't want it. Carol, he said, stepping closer, you deserve far more than just this opportunity. If it were pity, I wouldn't have listened to you for hours, or taken you to the gallery, or learned so much from your words. This is about justice and admiration. She exhaled slowly. It's hard to accept that someone really sees you when your whole life you've been taught to stay small. I know, Mike replied gently, but maybe it's time to unlearn that. In the days that followed, she accepted the scholarship. She filled out forms, went through quick interviews with supervisors who had never even looked her in the eye before, and began dividing her days between the intensive course and her night job. She barely slept. She was constantly exhausted. But there was a new light in her eyes, a fire inside her that withstood even the cruelest fatigue. Michael remained present, not every night, but often enough to keep their connection alive. He met her at the corner cafe for quick breaks, sent short messages with book or video recommendations, and visited the gallery where she had started her internship. And each time they were together, something seemed to grow between them, not rushed, not promised, but nurtured. Their care that was almost love, though it had no name yet. One afternoon they sat side by side on a wooden bench in the park next to the technical school. She was reading a book about Japanese design. He was watching the dogs running on the lawn. "Do you have someone?" she asked suddenly, eyes still on the book. Mike took a while to answer. "I did. A wife, Vanessa. She passed away 10 years ago." Carol turned to him, surprised. "I'm sorry. Cancer. Fast. Brutal. After her, I never got involved with anyone again. I shut down, buried myself in work, built walls high enough to keep everyone out. And for a while, I thought it was working. And now?" Mike looked at her. For a moment, his eyes were stripped of any defenses. "Now I'm learning to open a gate." She smiled, touched. But she still wasn't sure what to do with it. She wasn't a woman used to promises, and she didn't want a fairy tale. She wanted the truth. That was all. "I like talking to you," she said, "but I still don't know if I can fully trust you. I understand. You're still hiding things from me." "A few, but yes." She closed the book and looked him in the eyes. "I just want to know if you are who I think you are." Mike looked down for a second. "I'm the person you've met. I just haven't told you everything you deserve to know, but I will, when the time comes." She nodded slowly, like someone who understands, but keeps her eyes open. "Thursday I'm going to the library again. If you want to stop by, I'll be there. No more hiding." "No more hiding," he repeated. The goodbye was quiet, but meaningful. He watched her walk away with the book under her arm and determined steps. That same day, Mike returned to his penthouse in silence. He sat in his studio, turned on the corner lamp, and opened an old sketchbook. The first thing he drew was a chair. It looked like the one from the gallery. But this time, he imagined it in a small room filled with plants, a throw blanket draped over the back, and a mug of tea on the floor beside it. A room where a real woman, made of courage and tenderness, could sit and breathe. He signed the drawing with a firm stroke, and beside it he wrote, "Carol." The page slipped out of the magazine and landed on the library floor. Carol, sitting between the shelves in the design section, didn't notice it right away. She was immersed in a rare book on Scandinavian modernism, glasses sliding down the bridge of her nose, a pencil between her fingers. Only when she stood up to return the book to the shelf did she notice the loose, colorful page by her boot. She bent down, picked up the paper and flipped it over. It was a magazine article with a title in golden letters, "The Silent Empire of Mike Coleman, the man behind Luxuria Inc." Carol froze. The face in the photo was his. The eyes, the subtle smile, the carefully trimmed beard. Mike, or rather, Michael. Not an outside design consultant, not an occasional advisor, but the owner of everything. The words blurred before her eyes. She read the article faster and faster, each paragraph confirming what her gut had already understood. Mike was the CEO and founder of Luxuria Inc., one of the country's leading interior design brands. Responsible for million-dollar partnerships, honored by art and architecture institutions. One of the most influential men in the field, the same company where she cleaned floors, where she knelt to scrub coffee stains from executive carpets, where her sketches had seemed, until recently, far too personal to show anyone. She sat back on the wooden bench, stayed there for long minutes, the page in her hands, eyes fixed on some distant spot on the opposite wall. Deception, lies, performance. He had approached her like an ordinary man, talked about art, silence, loss, shared memories of his mother, his youth, his wife. Was all that just another role? That same afternoon, Carol returned to the apartment with firm steps and a heart racing. She found Donna Maria dozing in the armchair and covered her with the crocheted shawl. Then she locked herself in her room and turned on her phone. The message was direct. "We need to talk today." Mike was waiting at the corner cafe, his hands already clasped on the table, brow slightly furrowed. When she walked in, there was no smile. He stood up, hesitant, instantly recognizing what was written on her face. She sat down slowly, without touching the cup the waiter placed in front of her. She pulled the magazine page from her bag and laid it on the table between them, without saying a word. "You found out," he said softly. "I did," she replied. "What else is there for me to find out, Mike?" He took a deep breath, staring at the image of himself in the article. "I was going to tell you. When you thought I was charmed enough by your humility not to care about the truth." "No," he said, trying to stay calm. "I just wanted you to get to know me for who I am, not the title I carry." "But that title changes everything," she shot back. "It changes the reason behind the scholarship. It changes what you said. It changes what I thought we were building." Mike lowered his eyes, choosing his words carefully. "I understand how you're feeling. I failed. You lied. I withheld the truth, out of fear. Fear that you'd walk away if you knew who I really was. Or fear of not controlling the narrative," Carol said, her voice now quieter but firm. "You're a powerful man, used to shaping everything around you." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Not with you. With you, everything was different. I didn't control anything, Carol. I just let myself be someone real for the first time in years." She didn't answer. The silence between them grew like a fog. "The scholarship was real," he said at last. "You were selected on merit. Yes, I recommended your name, but I never interfered in the process. Your talent spoke for itself. But I would never have known that, would I? If that page hadn't fallen to the floor, I'd still think you were just an architect in love with furniture and quiet cafes." Mike leaned forward, his expression sincere. "And I still am that man. I'm the architect. I'm the widower who lost his will to create. I'm the son of a seamstress who fell in love with a girl who talked about wood as if she were reciting poetry." Carol looked away, swallowing hard. "I want to believe that, but now, I don't know. What can I do?" "Nothing," she said, "because trust, Mike, doesn't rebuild with nice gestures. It takes time." She stood up, grabbed her bag, and hesitated before taking her first step. "I liked you," she said without turning. "I really did. But now, I need to be alone." He nodded, not trying to stop her. "I'll be here." Carol left the cafe with wet eyes and a tight chest. It wasn't anger she felt. It was pain. The feeling that everything simple had been touched by a layer of deceit. That the honest conversations, the coffees, the silences were now covered by a doubt she didn't know how to shake off. The following weeks were filled with silence. She focused on her classes, her internship, her grandmother, avoided the cafes they used to go to, walked past the galleries without stopping, kept her phone at a distance. Mike didn't push, He didn't text, didn't call, but he was there in other ways. A new book discreetly left at the library, an indoor plant anonymously delivered to her home, an institutional email congratulating her for a highlight in her course. And despite everything, Carol missed him. Not the company owner, but the man who listened to her ramble about antique chairs. The man who said her eyes changed when she talked about furniture. She had loved him, still did, but it was still too soon. It still hurt, and she didn't know if there was a way back. The note arrived folded inside a cream-colored envelope, discreetly left on Carol's desk in the technical school's study hall. There was no sender, just her name, written in handwriting far too familiar to ignore. She opened it with uncertain hands. Inside, just a few words. Tonight, 7 p.m., 3 lines gallery, last room. When the right eyes see a piece, it gains a soul. M. Carol stared at the note for a few seconds, her heart pounding in her chest. It had been over a month since that hard conversation at the cafe, since the falling out, since the silence. She had tried to move on, to focus on what she was building, to distance herself from the idea that everything, the scholarship, the internship, the encouragement, had come from a dishonest place. But now this invitation felt different. Calm, no demands, no promises. At 6:57 p.m., she stepped through the doors of the 3 lines gallery with quiet footsteps. She'd never been there before. It was a minimalist space with raw concrete walls, soft lighting, and pieces carefully spaced as if each one needed silence around it to breathe. She passed works made of wood, metal, fabric. She didn't see Mike, nor any plaques with his name. But when she reached the last room, she stopped abruptly. In the center of the space stood a chair, not just any chair. It was hers, or rather, her design. The curved structure in light wood, the slightly reclined backrest, the handcrafted stitching of the upholstery. She brought a hand to her mouth, overcome with emotion. Next to the piece, a small, discreet plaque read, "Maria Chair, original design by Carol M. When drawing is an act of memory, produced as a one-of-a-kind edition." She stepped forward, gently touching the backrest. It was real. Someone had taken her sketch, her dream, and turned it into an object. An object that now stood there upright on display, existing in the world as living proof that her vision had worth. Behind her, a soft voice broke the silence. "You gave soul to what was just structure." Carol turned slowly. Mike was standing there, in a dark suit, no tie. His eyes less tired, his face sincere. More man than businessman. She looked at him in silence, tears welling in her eyes. "Why this?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Because you needed to see what I saw in you from day one." She lowered her eyes, moved. "This piece, Scoot, was made from my sketch." "Yes, one of the studio teams brought it to life, down to the last detail. Every curve, every stitch. I only changed one thing." "What?" "The signature. I asked them to keep only your name." Carol moved closer to the piece, touching the wood with reverence. She remained silent for a long moment before speaking again. "I missed you so much. And I hated that." "I did too," he replied, his voice husky. "I hated creating distance. I hated not trusting you from the start." She looked at him finally. "Why didn't you trust me?" "Because I thought I was my title. I thought that if I showed you who I really was, you'd see me like everyone else does, with fear, with interest, with distance. And now? Now I just want you to see me for who I am here," he said, placing a hand over his chest. "Just Mike." She smiled softly. A slow, timid smile carrying everything that had been suspended between them for weeks. "And I'm still just Carol." "You were never just." The gallery was empty, quiet, except for the faint sound of distant piano music. The two of them looked at each other like people who already had all the answers, even if they hadn't said them out loud. "Want to take a walk?" he asked, extending his hand. "There's a new cafe nearby. They make a carrot cake that might just change your life." She looked at his hand for a moment, then naturally laced her fingers with his. "I like slow changes," she said. "So do I." They walked together toward the gallery's exit. As they passed by the chair once more, Carol looked at it with new eyes, not as someone who dreams of creating, but as someone who already has, as someone who belongs. Outside, the sky had already darkened. The city lights were starting to glow, and the late winter chill was pierced by the warm breeze of something new being born. It wasn't a new beginning. It was the right beginning. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.